Hey everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast where I bring you the best and the brightest in the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. My guest today on the podcast is Sarah Noll Wilson, Chief Edge Officer at, you guessed it, Sarah Noll Wilson Incorporated. And Sarah is a professional leadership coach, speaker, and author of her new book, quote, Don't Feed the Elephants, Overcoming the Art of Avoidance to Build Powerful Partnerships. And we're going to dig into that and the whole book writing process in a little bit. But prior to running her own coaching and speaking business, Sarah worked in talent and leadership development roles at ARAG Legal Insurance and ING. With over 15 years leadership development, Sarah earned her master's degrees from Drake University in Leadership Development and a BA from the University of Northern Iowa in Theater Performance and Education. That's another fun story we'll get into. So let's get to it. Sarah's got a well of wisdom when it comes to leadership and relationships, both in and out of the office. So let's get to it. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Adam. So excited to be here.
I'm excited too. So we were chatting off air before we get on, and I want to talk about your startup, because you said lots of people are unaware of your theater background. Were you an overly dramatic kid? How did you go down the theater path? I think it's important. We need to know the origin stories here.
I'm laughing because I'm like, I don't know, but my mom and my siblings would be like, oh yeah, no, my parents would be like, absolutely. Sure. Yes, I was the kid who, when I was very little, would literally follow my siblings around the house talking to them, right? I would constantly be chatting and following them around and all of that. And so I got into theater. I hadn't thought about that in a long time.
Can we go deeper?
Yeah, a couple of things got me involved in theater from high school. One, my brother found his way into it, and he was a couple of years older. And so I connected with, his friends and knew that. But in my elementary, I always just enjoyed performing. And so I did theater and sports my freshman year, and then I dislocated my knee. And then that took me out of basketball, which I liked. And so then I stayed with theater, and then that just became a part of who I was. And so then that felt like the natural progression. Although what's strange is, I always knew that I didn't want to be a professional actor. But it was still the path I went because I loved it, and it's what I was good at and what I was familiar with. But when I looked at friends who, say, went on to move to New York or LA, that there was just never that drive for me. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too. So looking back on it now, those skills, those improv skills, the ability to stand up on stage, to stand up in front of an audience, how important was learning those pieces then to what you're doing now?
Oh, I mean, incredibly important. I think that I'm just at home on stage, right? There's not a lot of situations that make me nervous. One of the few situations, this is a true story, I'm very comfortable at stage. I'm very comfortable being in the moment. My style of facilitating is very much, following the learning. So I don't stick to a script. But I did a keynote where I recently performed and pulled out my accordion. And performing a musical instrument for people is so uncomfortable for me that
whole different ballgame.
Oh yeah, no, I was like, my heart was racing. I couldn't hit any of my notes, and that was actually kind of beautiful because it was all about imperfection. So
I love it. And are you a classically trained accordionist? What's the right word? Accordion player? I don't mean.
Yeah. No.
Is it more of a hobby? Are you like a polka freak? What's your kind of thing? Is it polka? Is it polka generated?
It's I do like a good polka. But I'm also my husband and I always joke that my heart must beat in a 3/4 time because I love a good waltz. I love all the music I get drawn to is very 3/4. And I had my grandpa's accordion and I knew how to play piano, and I just thought it would be fun to learn. And yeah.
So let's move it through. So the theater training was there, but you know that wasn't going to be forever, and you move into the corporate world, and you had talent and leadership positions at like ING, ARAG, I spoke about before. Why do you feel that you gravitated towards that kind of corporate field? Like, what was the draw there?
Well, it's interesting. I want to go back and share a really quick story.
Sure.
I think it's a great question. My first day of going into this acting class, it was like my first big acting class with one of our professors, Richard Glockner. And I remember the first day he looked at us all and he said, if you can see yourself doing something other than acting, then get the hell out of my class. Cause he's like, this work is so hard and it's so hard to break into it that you have to come from a place of only seeing yourself, only doing this. And I remember just being terrified, going like, well, I don't know that that's true for me. But the seed that got planted for me was, well, what is that for me? What is it? What's the only thing I can see myself doing? And for me, what always came back was, teaching and helping people learn. So I moved to Des Moines, Iowa, following college to, test an assumption that this boy I was with was worth like having a relationship with. And that worked out. And we've been married for quite a while now. And I just needed my nights free to do theater, and I needed insurance, or I needed like health insurance and benefits.
Right.
So I did what every good Des Moines person did, and I got a job in insurance and finance. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know what a 401k was, because that's not something you talk about in the theater world. You're like,
no, opposite.
Right. Yeah.
Scraping by.
And, but a couple of things happened fairly quickly. I noticed how the training that was happening to teach people the technical skills, I was, because of my theater education background, which wasn't teaching theater, but using theater as an educational tool. I was like, I wonder if I could make this more effective by applying what I know about learning and how people learn. So I got into the world of corporate training through the lens of technical training.
It's interesting. It was like you were primed for it. I mean, it was a logical progression.
Yeah.
It was a good segue. It was a good, amalgamation of your theater training and getting involved in what aspect of corporate America that was going to give you the foundational elements that you need from a career perspective, and also give you the health insurance and the financial stability.
Yeah. I mean, at my interview for the ING job, they literally asked me, do you think you can sit still in a cubicle? And I was like, I don't know. Well, let's find out.
Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens there. But something I want to ask you, from that exposure, you're a pretty observant person, we could tell. What did you observe about leadership from the sidelines, from the front lines, that you started to incorporate into your work and into your book, which we'll get into a little bit?
The absolute impact that a person who is in a position of power. So when I talk about leadership, I think of it as two different ways. One, it's an act. I think leadership is an act and not a role. It's something we do some of the time. But when we talk about leadership from a corporate structure, we'll talk the role. So you have formal authority and power. The thing that became really interesting to me is the seeing firsthand and experiencing the impact that person had, not just on how the business ran, but how people felt about themselves. And theater, I didn't realize this at the time, but my theater background, what it was priming me for was collaboration, was a deep sense of self-awareness, was building relationships, was how do we work in concert with each other to get the best possible output. And that wasn't necessarily the culture in corporate America, right? And so I just became really fascinated with who are the people who are doing this really well, and what is it about it? Because, one of the things, and we talk about this in our work, is that managers can make or break organizations, but they can also make or break people. And I became really, really interested in how does that work? And so, I attended a couple leadership development workshops, but I realized they were all facilitated by people who had never led a team. And I thought, well, how can I be effective if I don't know what it's like? And so then right, you could see where it's so then that moment of decision was, I want to lead as many different types of teams as I can, so I can understand that experience, so I can, deepen my knowledge and practice of it. And then at the same time, that's when I started getting my master's in leadership development.
Interesting too. And how did it align? And you got your master's at Drake, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How did it work out where you are now on the other side as an adjunct professor?
Yeah.
And what are you teaching?
Well, I'm not teaching as much just because my business is taking off so much. So I support them as a guest lecturer. Yeah. So the class that I really love to teach is adaptive leadership, and how do we truly create cultures that are adaptive and are able to thrive in times of change and uncertainty. And from a very human first perspective. So that's the class I love.
As someone who's in tune on the ground in many different areas, like when you hear the buzz term servant leadership, or maybe not such a buzzword, but how do you interpret servant leadership? I mean, is that what all leadership should be? Because I see it thrown around a lot. I've heard some great, and I've seen some amazing definitions of it. And I've also seen people do two things: people that actually live it without calling it that,
right?
And then I also see people that say it
and
don't do it, that don't act on it. What are your thoughts?
No, that's why I paused, because I was trying to think through how I
saw you pausing, and then I said, let me talk a little bit more, because that's what we do as a host. We provide air cover.
Yeah. No, it's I think that, I don't necessarily use the term servant leadership, but I do believe that your job, if you are in a formal manager position, is to serve the humans that are on your team, right? I do believe that. I think the reason that I shy away from using the term servant leadership is exactly what you talked about, is that it's a phrase that gets used a lot. And because people say it, they think they're doing it. And that's one of the things this applies to all of us as humans, but it is especially important for people who are in those leadership positions. Is there's real gaps between how people think they're showing up and how they're really showing up, right? Your good intentions are not the same as actually making impact, and it's not the same as taking action. And so I always pause a little bit when someone's like, "Oh, I'm a servant leader." I'm like, well, okay, I'll observe that.
Tell me what that means, right?
That's the case. And there are people who espouse that because they actually believe it, they live it, they try to do it. But leadership is hard, and there's an art and a science to it, and it requires so much emotional regulation and so much self-awareness. 100%. And most of us don't have it as much as we think.
So how does someone find the self-awareness to be a good leader? Are there exercises? How do you teach someone to look in the proverbial mirror?
Yeah. It's, for us, the way that we approach it is first getting really curious about yourself. And when we're working with leaders, especially because a lot of our work is through understanding how they show up in conversations, is literally just thinking about, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking? If I'm struggling in a situation, what values are being stepped on, or what needs aren't being met. So it sort of depends on each situation, but it's when we talk about self-awareness, it's not just experiencing it, it's taking a step back, getting on the balcony and going, what the hell happened? Not just what happened, but how did I feel, and what was I thinking, and what does that say about me? And it is a muscle. It is a muscle that needs to be built. And you're never, kind of similarly, when you talked about some people say they're a servant leader and they really aren't showing, the same thing is true for self-awareness. And one of the quickest ways I know someone's not self-aware is they quickly tell me how self-aware they are, as if it's a destination. Instead of,
you can't call yourself a thought leader, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
right. It's like instead of the people who I observe who behave in ways that are indicative of building that self-awareness muscle, will say things like, well, I try, I work at it. There are times where I miss it. And, but the people are like, I'm there. This is who I am. I'm like, no, that actually tells me you're not.
Interesting perspective on that. I want to go back and talk about your journey. 4 years since you went out on your own, building Sarah Noll Wilson Incorporated. What was that journey like for you, going from that? Was it scary? Or was the time right for you to jump into? I know it was scary as hell for me. To say, you know what, I'm going to do this myself. I'm ready. I'm going to do it. Or I think I'm ready. I'm going to do it. See how self-aware you are.
Yeah. It was like it was a slow burn. I started speaking on the side 13 years ago. And I would just do little events here and there. I'd work with maybe a client or two. And then that just started to ramp up. And I was so fortunate so the company that I worked with prior Arag is how you pronounce it. It's a good German name, was incredibly supportive of that. They were like, we know we only have you for a few years, so we want to maximize the time. So I was able to do a really nice soft landing. And what I mean by that is I was able to drop down to part-time, build up, but it was absolutely scary, and it was until it wasn't. And then it became, then there are cycles of it, right? Like there's like, oh God, what are we doing now? I've been in it 4 years and we're embarking on this whole new endeavor. And now this is scary in a new way.
I know, I'm with you.
Yeah. It's like startup mode all over again right now for us.
Oh my God, it's part of the journey. And I mean, I can only speak from my experience, but I'm sure I speak to other founders and entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call us. I think I'm a small business owner, if you really want to break it down. I mean, entrepreneur sounds sexy, but I'm a small business owner. What has been the most challenging part of being a solopreneur, entrepreneur, small business owner? What was that like? Maybe it was something that you had a preconceived notion of that turned out to be either a lot easier or a lot harder than you thought?
That's a really great question. I mean, one of the things sort of initially, because when I first started, it was just me. I realized that I was just struggling to keep up with things and manage all the different, balls in the air in a way that I never had. And that's actually what led me to getting diagnosed with ADHD. My therapist said that. She said most adults who weren't diagnosed as children get diagnosed in their first 2 years of starting their business because they lose all of the constraints that exist in a business. And so I think that, some of the things in the beginning that were hard was one, really understanding, well, what's my focus? What's the work that I can do? Because I could do a lot of it. And I think we're still in this evolution of tightening up our focus. Well, I don't think we are, I know. But things like charging your worth, knowing what the market can handle and all of that, like that was a journey for me. Investing in my company was never hard. I was always willing to sacrifice my salary so that I could keep investing because I knew what was possible. I think one of the things that surprised me I started building a team very quickly. Basically the day I got diagnosed with ADHD, I was like, I need an assistant. And then I just started building, and now I have this really incredible team. But I think that the thing that was in hindsight that I would do differently is that the work was so busy that I wasn't able to actually build the structure the team needed in order to be successful, right? Everyone was like in full reaction mode.
The infrastructure.
Yeah, like the infrastructure, the roles weren't clear. And while I had managed teams, so this was the aha, managing an existing team in an existing structure, an existing infrastructure with policies and procedures is very different than, hey, you have this blank slate. What the hell do you need? And then how do you communicate that and navigate that? And I feel like this last year was the year we finally started to hit that stride and get that clarity.
That is an interesting one, and I'm kind of nodding and smiling because I go through the same process. My company, NHP, is about 5 years old, and as you grow, like I've been in organizations, I've led teams in but until you have your own company, you're like, shit, like now I got to figure out what does this team structure look like? Who do I need? Roles and responsibilities, and it's an evolution, and it's a moving target as well because you may hire somebody who's kind of a jack of all trades, and as you grow and scale and become, stronger financially, you can narrow in and you can start to specialize. So it's an evolution there. Hey everybody, first I'd like to thank you all for spending time with me and my guest on the podcast. This show is my canvas to showcase amazing people from the world of recruiting, entrepreneurship, and leadership and unpack their career journeys for everyone to learn from. But this show is also a business generator for me, as well as creating thought leadership and endless amazing content. And I've taken what I've learned in the past 3 years and over 200 recorded and 100 live shows and distilled it down into a digital playbook that I call the Pause Course. Now you could learn how I build, manage, and produce the podcast and use it to drive real business development and relationships. Today I'm sharing all of my secrets behind the podcast, and you can get it all at thepausecourse.com. This course is for anyone, whether you're starting out or an advanced podcaster using it for B2B or B2C. It's filled with all of my insights, learnings, tips, tricks, and templates. So get it now at thepausecourse.com and learn all my secrets. Thanks. I want to go back, and if you don't mind speaking a little bit about your ADHD diagnosis, what are some of the tricks and tools that you use to stay focused that other people could apply, whether they're diagnosed or not?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that was really important for me was adopting this mindset of a Sarah manual. And because there's so many tips and there's so many tricks that are out there. There's also all these best practices. Here's how you need to be most productive. Here's how you manage a project, all of that. Most of those are largely developed for neurotypical brains. They weren't developed for neurodivergent brains. So my first step and what I would invite people to think about is to be unapologetic about really thinking about what do you need. And here's an example that might sound like strange to somebody, but I know that sometimes when I'm needing to stay focused, I need an external pressure that I can't create myself, or I just need somebody there to witness or be with me as I'm working on something. So my colleague, Dr. Teresa Peterson, sometimes I'll be like, I need to get this done. Will you just fold laundry while I'm doing it so I can talk it out loud with you and get it done? So that's something that Sarah.
Is that accountability? Is that accountability though? Is that like an accountability factor? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that accountability and it's that external pressure again that I can't always create for myself internally. So that is something that's been really helpful, is to just listen to and be okay with, this is what I need. For me, I know that I can blow through emails from 8 to 11 at night in a really intense way, because for whatever reason, that's when my mind
It's organized too. It's also linear and you're focused on it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I don't have other distractions. I don't have other emails coming through, all of that. And so just paying attention and noticing. I think that, the challenge for me is when there's so many different things happening. And then, that's when my issues with prioritization become really difficult. And so sometimes
things fall through the cracks, right?
Yeah. If we're speaking real, transparently, probably the biggest thing I've had to work on is the shame that I feel when things fall through the cracks. There was so much shame in the beginning for myself, or beating myself up of what's wrong with me and why can't I manage that? Or even, related, I struggle with, because my short-term memory is so bad, I struggle with remembering faces and names with people who I might have incredible relationships with from a face blindness perspective. And so that I've had to work on, to be it's just how my brain is. And I know that I can communicate how much I love and respect them, and me forgetting them has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with just how my brain is structured.
Interesting. I never really thought about the shame factor. That's fascinating. So when it came to, all right, time to write this book, knowing that some of the challenges that were ahead of you, how did you go into the process of writing this book? Because you knew it was going to be an uphill battle.
Yeah. I found a company that would partner with me to help me write it.
Help you. You outsource the parts that are you're straight up knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and knowing the parts where you need to outsource. And that goes for many elements in life. Yeah. For me, there's a balance of, and it was kind of an aha moment of, instead of focusing on the things I wasn't good at, for example, when I launched my and it's very tactical, I knew that I wasn't going to be a video audio editor. I didn't want to learn that. So I knew it's better to outsource it and pay the cost to somebody who's great at it, instead of me taking the time to learn something that I'm not really passionate about. And the same thing goes to the book writing. For example, I had Javon McCormick on the other day. I recorded with him. He's the CEO of Scribe Media. They work with authors.
That's who I worked with.
Great. Fantastic. So we're talking the same language here. They have a process that works. They work with authors to help get the ideas out of their head and onto the paper. And that's what you needed. You needed that Sherpa.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great way to describe it, because it's a funny thing, because I think there are things that we feel like, whether it's because of the type of work we do, when I look at my role in being in the space of leadership development and culture work and relationships, that must mean I should be able to be this excellent writer because I can be an excellent communicator in other ways. But let's be real, writing a book, that's a whole different skill and science. And I had never done it. I'd written articles and I've done
maybe a couple of pages.
But that's completely different than what's the arc of and I didn't even know where to start. And I know for me, and this, again, this was a journey, process too, because when I first started exploring how am I going to do this, a couple of things, just like we talked about, I knew that if it was just me on my own, it wouldn't happen, because it hadn't happened yet. Right. It's it hadn't happened yet, even though I wanted to. So if I do this on my own, it's just not going to be, I know enough about myself now that I need that external support. I need that guide walking alongside me. And also, again, I'd never embarked on writing a book. I think, when I get to book 2, whenever that becomes clear what I want to explore and write about, I will be able to tackle like so much more of that up front on my own because I understand the process. But, what was so great is, and so there's a bit of like, for me, I had to challenge my value of authenticity of, well, if somebody is walking alongside me and kind of helping me get the ideas out of my head onto the page, and then I'm cleaning them up and I'm editing them, is that really me? And that took me.
Why wouldn't it be? Why? Because you thought that did you have a preconceived notion that you actually had to do everything yourself to make it like, yeah, 100%. I mean, it's not a ghostwriter. This isn't a ghostwriter by any means.
Right.
And that's a difference. And you don't want people to perceive that, oh, you worked with a company. There's a big difference there. And listen, only you can answer it. So let me ask you this. Don't feed the elephants. Overcoming the art of avoidance to build powerful partnerships. Okay, I understand the latter part of that. What does it mean, don't feed the elephants? Yeah,
so for the last decade plus, I've been on a mission to understand how do you actually create a culture where elephants don't stay around long. Like the elephant in the room, right? Let's play on that metaphor. That's what the book is based around. Is when I was learning about adaptive leadership, one of the characteristics of an adaptive culture is that elephants are called out. And I remember realizing I've never experienced a team where that existed. Maybe it was because I largely was working in Midwest teams and we have this whole sort of Midwest nice, the violent politeness, right, is what I lovingly call it.
Violent politeness.
Yeah. And all
right, I'm gonna that's gonna stew around in my head for the rest of the day.
Yeah, okay. It's a good one. It's not my phrase, but when I read it, I was like, that completely describes like a lot of our culture. So many of the books that were out there was about how to have the conversation. And I wanted to understand why I was avoiding it to begin with and why, and what was it so that we could undo that so that we could show up more powerfully. So the idea of, I'm actually like, you don't know, but I've been squeezing this like one of our peanuts as we've been. But the idea is that the elephant in the room isn't a person, isn't a thing. It's our avoidance. And when we are avoiding having a conversation we need to have either with ourselves or with other people, we're feeding the elephant. It's like we're giving it a peanut and allowing it to grow and stay. So that's where the title comes from.
Okay. I mean, that's a fantastic analogy. Who is this book for?
Me and people like me. No, I mean,
most people write books for themselves.
I wrote it. It's like my love letter for my fellow avoiders. It's the people who struggle, who want connections, who maybe want to be courageous, but they don't know how to, and want to show up more powerfully either for themselves or for other people. It was more specifically, it was written for the workplace, but I was very intentional to weave in stories from a personal perspective because at the end of the day, relationships are relationships. And while there's different dynamics at home versus in the office, a lot of the same principles apply. And so while the initial target is for people in the workplace, the hope was, and the feedback we're getting is that people also make the connection of, oh, I think my husband and I need to work on this, or I think with my siblings, I need to show up differently.
So let's talk about, let's talk about the concept of avoidance and let's keep it focused here in the workplace.
Yeah.
Are people not trained, experienced in the ability to deliver and receive feedback, talk about issues? Is it a radical candor type of situation? Do you see, there's a lot of questions here. We call this a 10-parter.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of talk about it. Is it because they're not learning by example because leaders aren't taught to do it the right way? Is it a cultural thing? Is it an age thing?
All of those. I mean,
We call that a catch-all.
Yeah. There's lots of reasons that we avoid. That's so much of the work that we've evolved in as a companies. We realize that a lot of times when training fails, it's not because you have a how-to problem or you have a why-do problem, which is we describe it as like, why do you do what you do? That actually gets in the way. And sometimes when we can understand like what's our foot on the brake, that can help us get our foot back on the gas so that we can move. So just teaching people about here's how you have conversations wasn't necessarily helping people. Now, to be clear, I love books like Radical Candor. I think that really offered a perspective shift of, oh, I can be kind and I can be direct, because that's a reason people avoid. So I became really fascinated in like, where does the avoidance come from? So culturally could be how you were raised. You might have experienced trauma related to it. Let's say you were raised in a house where you were like, you do not speak back. And if you do, there were consequences. Or let's say you were in
it was embedded in your DNA. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, and it's always come from a place of self-protection. Sometimes, and I always like to talk about this because it's not comfortable for people usually in leadership. Sometimes we avoid because we're protecting our power. Like we might not engage because we're actually protecting the power we have or the connection to power that we might be experiencing.
Interesting perspective. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so like,
yeah, that's,
no, go ahead. What's coming up for you?
No, I'm talking about the word blame, right? Like there's plenty of blame to go around in these situations, but like how do you get to the root cause of these problems? Like what's the process?
Yeah, the process that we posit, and it's not a one size fits all, right? That's like humans are complex and relationships are complex, but it's a set of tools people can have. We call it the curiosity first approach. And because what I was observing is that people, when they were in situations where they were avoiding or struggling with somebody, right? Like, we call it the blame event, right? They just moved to blaming the other person, that they weren't spending enough or any time considering the other person's perspective in the situation. They weren't spending time really reflecting on, well, why am I so triggered in this moment? And what do I actually need? They just knew that they were pissed at the other person, but they didn't actually know why or what they needed or how to have that conversation. And then the third part is that almost never were people considering the role they played in the conversation as well. So the curiosity first approach is get curious with yourself, get curious about the other person, and then get curious with them. Not always all three. Sometimes we can free an elephant just by reflecting and going, oh, okay. Like that one was on me.
It kind of goes back to the self-awareness.
Completely.
It kind of goes back to, and it goes back to building and utilizing a strong EQ.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's emotional agility versus empathy, right? Being able to layer and lever because if I'm being purely empathetic, that means I'm coming down to your level immediately in every situation versus having to be able to keep the business context in mind, the relationship context in mind, and actually be able to help you.
Yeah.
Because if I come down and we're both at the same level now, how the hell am I going to help you?
Yeah.
If I have to use all my emotional energy inside to get down to your level. And there's a balancing act there. I want to switch gears a little bit, but let me just wrap this up right now. So, what is a key takeaway you want folks to come away from after reading this book?
I mean, the main one is that the elephant isn't the other person. The elephant is created when you avoid. And if you're okay with that, then that's just understand that's one of the main key takeaways.
Yeah, I love it, and this applies to everything. So it's geared. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's geared towards the workplace, but the lessons, the learnings really apply to all relationships across the board.
100%.
So I want to talk about your experience coaching. Can you talk about a time where you've been called into a coaching situation where you actually failed and it didn't go the way you were? I love asking this question. Or it didn't go to the way you projected, and what'd you do about it? We will block the names of the
yeah. I think that I'm thinking about like the how would I define failure? Early on, maybe there were moments where I failed because of how I was showing up, or I was playing safe, or I was playing small. But for me, I wouldn't call it a failure, but when it's frustrating, or when it like sometimes will even break my heart a bit, is when you have a group that's just unwilling, or you have a person who's just unwilling, or they're not ready. And I can honor that. Everyone's on their own journey. Not everyone is ready to do the work that they need to do. I was working with a team I was brought in. They had some really major trust issues, and we had done some really good work. And then situations happened that got eroded, and situations happened where the leaders weren't holding people accountable and further eroded. And and literally this is a group of executives that when they would get into a room, they just wouldn't even talk to each other. And I tried as many different doors in, but the reality is that the top leader wasn't ready or willing to take ownership or to do what was needed. Other people weren't ready. Other people were literally traumatized because of the abusive kind of behavior that was happening. And so that was the first time that I, in the middle of a session, said, you should fire me because this isn't a good use of your time or money. And where you're at I'm not what you need.
We're not there yet. No.
We're not there yet. And so, that was a turning point.
But I would call that a success, Sarah. I would call that a success if you're looking at it from the outside, because it's so much awareness of like, hey, listen, you guys brought me in to help out with, get you through something, but you need something much deeper, stronger, whatever the case was. Are you just ready for any of it? And how is, in the last couple, things are finally opening back up in the States here with the pandemic and everything. But how did the last 2 years really affect, the feeding of the elephants?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it made it a lot worse because it was almost easier to avoid people when you don't have to freaking look at them in the face and go in every day.
Well, and it's interesting because on some level, yes. And on the other level, what we saw is that actually it became better because I
just hang up and walk away, right? Hey, Sarah, here's the deal.
Right. I'm turning off my camera and I can literally step away from it. And also, while there's still direct messages and direct chats that can happen, there isn't the congregating, right, that maybe would happen as much that would continue to feed it. So it's a yes and that on the thing that I would say is that what we are experiencing, and let's be real, even though things are opening up, we're still in it. Especially, and who knows how long, forever we're fundamentally changed. I think that's one of the traps people are falling into is we're opening up, so we're back to normal. It's no, do you know how much trauma everyone has
a new normal.
Through? Yeah. This isn't we're fundamentally different. But I think that, that's something that I'm really fascinated with is just the impact that the pandemic had on relationships. Because one thing that is true is that we got into incredible divisiveness that was on public display in workplaces in a way, politics were on display in the workplace in a way that before could be kept in the shadows, right? How you felt about the pandemic, how you felt about masking, how you felt about vaccines, all of that suddenly became on display. So the thing I will say is what we saw is that, and then you add in isolation, right?
Lots of factors here.
Lots of factors that to build really good relationships took so much more energy and so much more skill than a lot of people had going into it. Right? It's we should have always been intentional about building relationships. It's just pre-pandemic, we had so many more opportunities and chance encounters that now we had to be laser focused. And because we didn't necessarily have those skills, the erosion of relationships happened in some cases at a much faster rate.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. So let's bring it home here, and I want everyone. We'll talk about the book, and we could get in a moment here. But I'd love to ask all my guests a couple of questions because I love this perspective and I love to hear it. So, Sarah, what is the single greatest piece of advice that you've ever received that you take action on every day? The actionable advice, I call it.
Mm-hmm. I have so many things. I'll fill the space for you as I'm thinking.
Go for it, please.
Something that I take action on every single day. Well, it could
be a mantra. It could be something that you just believe in, something you repeat. Your kind of aha moment.
Yeah. It's I know they're in there. I just can't come up with it. What came up with for me? And as soon as you asked it, I thought of a situation, but then when you added the every day, then
that's a kicker. That's a kicker on this question too, because I like to see because anybody can say to you, what's the greatest piece of advice you ever received? Okay,
so
great.
Here's the actionable thing that definitely drives us every day is we can't get to version 10 if we don't start with version 1. Right. So everything that we're creating, everything we're building, we try really hard to embrace an experimenter's mindset. That's one of our core things. And sometimes it can be really easy to get paralyzed by perfection or to go, we're not ready. This isn't ready. This isn't good enough. And so we're constantly pushing ourselves to say, how do we just get this out there? Or how do we try this with the client? Or how do we do this? Because we can't get to version 10 without starting with version 1. So that's a mantra that drives us.
I love it. And last but not least, you look back on your life and your career and you look back at those times that were hard, those struggles. Think about, before you were even diagnosed with ADHD and you didn't know what it was and you knew you had something that you had to fix and work on and you needed to find that focal point. And on the other side of it now, when you're proud of your life, your family, the work that you're doing, the good work that you're doing, and you want to show gratitude, how do you stay focused? What is your compass in life? Sarah Noll Wilson, what is your North Star?
I want to leave people better than I found them. I really believe that everyone has greatness within them. I really do. They just need to be nurtured. And if I can be the sun that nurtures them, that would be incredible.
I love it. And that's such a positive mindset. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom. I want everyone to check out sarahnollwilson.com. We're going to link it up in the notes section. I really appreciate it. But where else can folks find you? Where could they connect with you? Where could they learn more?
Yeah, they can go to our website, sarahnollwilson.com, and don't be fooled, even though it's my name on it. I have an incredible team of people that I get to work with who are helping us make the work better for humans. Also, as social media, I'm really active on all the channels, and my DMs are always open.
Awesome. Good stuff, Sarah. Hang with me one moment here. And everybody, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. You learned. Please check out her book. It's pretty awesome. And maybe you open up a page or two and see what you can learn about yourself in this journey. And everyone listening, remember, if you want to find out more, catch us at thepodcast.com, all your favorite social media channels. Remember, take care of each other. Look out for one another and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search The Podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.